John, great to meet you. Thanks for doing this, and congratulations on your first book.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm happy to be here. So I'm pretty still living the post publication high, I guess. So
Yeah, I'm always amazed. And obviously we'll get into it. Get into the book, but I'm amazed at people that can formulate one. I mean, you've had your Substack. How long have you had your Substack for now?
it's probably going close to 2 years now because I think it was late 2023 when I started. So it's probably getting close to 2 years.
And what prompted you to start that?
I mean, part of it probably honestly was my wife was tired of hearing me just like rant and talk about things because I'm a big reader. I mean, I don't know, 700-800 books in my house, and I read all the time, and I kind of balance it between fiction and nonfiction. So I'd read theory, political theory, and stuff, and I would just talk about it all the time. And my wife kind of encouraged me. She was like, "You should probably start writing some of this stuff down," and I did from there. And I was also a history major in college, so I was used to writing. So it kind of just it was a nice fit.
Yeah, it's amazing the evolution of Substack. My friend of mine, I don't know if you follow him, Jim Kunstler. He does what's called the Kunstlercast, and his articles. He does a blog every Monday and Friday, and his website actually got nuked about 6 months ago. And he had a Substack, but now he's moved everything over to it. And he's told me like his growth has been tremendous ever since he moved over to Substack.
Yeah, I've noticed the platform has really taken off. I mean, I was sitting at like a couple hundred subs for probably like 6, 7 months, and then I don't remember which one of the articles I wrote, but after that, it exploded, and then I noticed more and more people getting on there. So I think it's a great platform for long form discussion, especially. Like you can have your small discussions on Twitter, but if you really want to get into the weeds, I think Substack's the place to be.
Substack's for the scholars, I think.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I had a friend of mine told me one time. He said, what was it? I think he said like 10,000 subscribers on Instagram is the equivalent to like 2,000 on Twitter, and 10,000 on Twitter was equivalent of 1,000 on Substack because like quality wise was his theory. So I don't know how accurate that is.
Interesting. Yeah, you know what? I have a Substack. I don't write though, but I created one because I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to post these, I might as well.
Mhm.
Because once you create them, you just copy and paste and attach the clips and whatnot. But I've even noticed lately for myself, I have more people subscribing to me on Substack, and I don't even write anything like you. I don't have any deep thoughts to that degree. I'm a terrible writer, man.
Well, it is a skill. I wouldn't say I'm a great writer, but I'll say this: thank God for spell check because I've always been able to write, but I can't spell to save my life. So
Well, and also too, with Twitter, I mean, Twitter is my go-to right now for the media, from a media standpoint, uh,
mhm.
the news. But it's hard though, and I don't know if Substack's trying to adopt the same like with the notes to be able to write short little. That's all I ever do is write Substack notes. So I don't know if Substack's trying to compete in that area.
I think it's trying to almost be like not a Twitter clone, but it's very similar. Because I don't know if you remember maybe a year or two ago, after Elon took over, if you post a link to Substack on Twitter, it kind of like you won't get as much traction because it's an outside link, and I think a lot of that's because, like you said, it's almost mirroring, like copying Twitter with the notes and then with the video hosting now as well. So
But they don't do a spaces or anything yet.
I don't think they do spaces, but I've seen live video feeds on there, which I've never watched anything really on Substack, but I've noticed now they have that live feature and people will go live on Substack. So
Man, it's funny with all this stuff. They're competing with each other, but I feel like they're all part of the same tentacles.
yeah, I don't understand really why you would see them as competition necessarily, especially because so many people use them to sort of they sort of cross post on everything, and you would think you would get traction across all of them. But Twitter did launch that articles function where you can write articles on Twitter now. So I guess maybe they see that as a competition because they're both doing the same thing.
I can't keep up with X right now with everything that's happening in LA. You following any of that stuff?
I've been watching it, man, and I'll be honest, like it reminds me a lot of the fires in Maui a little bit. The devastation level. And then you see all the stuff about the insurance cancellations and all, and you want to put on your tinfoil hat and go real far with it, but I don't know. I mean, I lived outside of LA. I lived in San Diego for about 5 years, so I'm familiar with the area. So it's kind of crazy to see what's happened over there. But I don't know. Maybe it is just the stupidity of the policies around environmentalism in California that's caused this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm on a text thread with some former military people, and some of the stuff they're writing about. I mean, how if you're in LA, get out of there. I have a bad feeling about this. It'd be easy to block the main highways out of the basin and hit the place with anything or cause mass panic, and the kill zone is set up. Mass death in LA could be sufficient to declare a national emergency type of scenario. I didn't even think about any of that stuff.
Well, I mean, if you just think about it, I always tell my wife this all the time. Anytime we drive near Atlanta or through Atlanta, I always tell her it would take like 2 days, maybe a week if the power went out and these people would start eating each other, because there's just so many people crammed in such a small space. So even if it's just the fire and people can't get out, it's going to be, I mean, I've already seen the videos of people looting houses, you know? So, I mean, it would be a prime area for something horrible to happen. Cause I mean, I live in Alabama and there's more people in LA County than the entire state of Alabama. So that's a lot of people crammed into one space.
Well, plus you had people setting fires, starting additional
Yeah.
fires.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's just so they can loot stuff or if they just want to cause chaos. Somebody told me the other day, we live in the age of the psyop. So you can never tell what's real and what isn't.
Well, and the other thing is, running through my mind, reading some of these comments, I'm like, okay, could this be the start of dominoes, right? Where
Mm.
some mass panic, could carry into other cities.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Especially if some areas you could get copycat stuff if people are starting fires, especially in places like near California where you have, you know, somewhere like Denver, you probably couldn't, but any other city that you could cause that kind of panic with, especially with setting fires. Because if you remember a few years ago, maybe was it 3 or 4 years ago, they had the wildfires, and there were people going around setting more fires like everywhere. People were just copying, and they caught people in the process, I believe.
I remember being in LA 6 years ago, and I was there like a couple of days or a week after a fire in Malibu. And I'll never forget, I was in like downtown LA, Hollywood, Redondo Beach area, and the fog. It felt like a fog, and you park your car somewhere, and there was just ashes all over your car.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I remember like I was there when I was stationed in Pendleton, and a couple of times we had wildfires break out, and they would have to evacuate areas of the base because it would get so bad, and they couldn't control them. And that was probably early 2000s when that was. And I mean, and if you've been there, I mean, you get on the five, and there's any traffic, you're stuck. A 30-minute drive turns into 2 hours. So, any type of panic, and those people are stranded basically.
And there's always traffic to begin with on a
Hmm.
regular night there. I mean, that city, man, and pardon me my language. I mean, it's just the traffic never stops.
Oh no.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, and what's crazy is you have what, 5 lanes going each direction.
Yeah, there's
You have
nothing they can
five
do.
lanes.
There's nothing they can
Yeah,
do.
yeah. Did you ever see? Were you ever there when the state troopers would try to like break the traffic up?
No.
They would. I've saw it a couple times. They would get out. California Highway Patrol would get out there, and they would serpentine across the lanes, the lights on, until they got the cars to stop, and they would wait a certain amount of time to try to create a gap in between, the traffic, so that the traffic could actually flow. I mean, it's still. I mean, you got 5 lanes going both directions, and it's just backed up. I mean, that's just it really is almost one continual urban area because, you go from LA to Carlsbad or whatever. It's just town after town. There's no separation whatsoever.
Yeah, and people have talked about get away from the urban areas, get away. I mean, I live right outside of Phoenix. I mean, I'm 20 minutes north, so I'm not that far away. But stay away from urban areas, and this is another example of why you don't want to live near a big city, especially like New York or LA or Chicago. Mm-hmm. But I mean, think about. I was thinking about what if you have an electric car in LA? You're fucked. I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and that's what they were pushing for in California too, right? Like trying to get everybody in electric cars, and what happens when you can't. I always tell people like you should have at least one car that was built like before 2010 just to be safe, because even with the gas cars now, they're going to put chips in them, right? Or they can cut the cars off. So you kind of want something old enough that you can maintain yourself and that nobody can do anything to,
I wish I had my 94 Taurus still.
Oh, that would be nice. Yeah. I have an extra old Volkswagen I bought as a car for me and my oldest son to work on. So that's my bug out vehicle for now, if we ever get it running.
So you think in terms of that too? I mean, do you think in terms of like visualizing if something were to occur to get out?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of balance it. I'm not a full blown prepper, but I have like a bunch of stuff, I've got tons of food stored up, like rice, canned goods. I've got the big barrels for the water. What's it called? I can't think now. But the big drums you can put on like your outside your house. They'll connect to your. I'm having a brain fart right now. I can't think. What are they called? They're on your roof, and the water runs down. And why am I not thinking of the word?
The water tank?
No, but they're your gutters on your house, and you can connect the big water. It's like a 55-gallon water drum to collect water off that, and you can recycle the rainwater. So I have stuff like that, but also I live in a pretty rural area, and my part of my family like lives on a farm and stuff, so I have access to a lot of like if something were to go south, it would take me like 30 minutes to get to a place where I'm pretty much remote. So that's my fallback plan.
I was talking to people up in Western North Carolina that were experiencing the hurricanes, and a friend of mine was out of power for 10 days, and I think I've shared this so many times on this podcast, so I'm sorry for people that have to re-listen to it, but I think it's he was saying the most important thing was access to clean water. He's like, obviously, when you go through something, you can prepare all you want, but when you go through it, you realize, things you did right, things you did wrong, and what you'll correct going forward. But he said the most important thing of it all is having access to clean water. Everything else you can kind of, you can limp through.
Oh yeah, I mean, because think about how long. I mean, I don't remember now exactly, but you can't go very long without water. You can go a while without food, but without water, and at least having a way to sanitize the water. Whether you can boil it, so having the water and access to it. But if you live in Arizona or California, y'all don't have a ton of water to that you have access to. Like where I'm at in Alabama, there's rivers everywhere, right? And we have groundwater and well water, and a lot of the people I know have well water as well. So we kind of have a constant access, which is nice.
If that were to occur here, if we had a power outage and in the summer here, I don't know that I would last a day and a half. If it's 110.
Oh yeah, I bet. Yeah, you think about like Arizona, like as far as the population of Arizona really only exists there in such numbers because of air conditioning. Like I would be interested to see what the numbers were pre-air conditioning out there in Arizona.
This city was never designed to handle this many people. I don't think. I mean, it's space-wise it does. There's plenty of room because it's a big valley, but there's no water.
Well, I mean, back to LA, that's LA's problem, right? They're having to steal water from the Colorado River. Like that place shouldn't be what it is. They've been stealing water and pumping it in there to turn it into what it is now. And you're seeing that problem now without the water. What happens to LA,
Could you imagine if there was a power outage in Las Vegas? What the strip, what those animals would turn into in the casinos?
Uh, it would be Day of the Dead within like a few, what, maybe 24 hours. I give it 24 hours.
You want to talk Mad Max scenario?
Oh yeah.
Like, could you? I mean, can you imagine if you're in the casino? What if you're an employee behind the cage, and people
Oh
can't?
yeah.
All of a sudden, they can't get their money. They will rip that cage right off right out of the.
Oh yeah. No. And then the worst part is if all the power goes out, even if you manage to get out of there, what do? Right? Like if the whole city goes down, like you're in the middle of the desert. You're so far from everything. Like you can only make it so far. So I would not. I've driven that. I've driven through that area. I've driven to Vegas, and I've also driven from here to San Diego a couple times. And when you leave El Paso and you're heading that bottom part of Arizona and New Mexico, there's nothing.
Nothing. Will you take the 40? Interstate 40?
I think so. It's been
Yeah.
years since I did it, but yeah, I just remember hitting El Paso, and I always tell people this: I hit El Paso, got through it, and I had one CD in my car. That's all I had at the time.
What year was this?
And 2007 maybe.
That's right. That's
So
right. When I moved here, at the end of '06 from Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was around that time period, right? So everyone still had CD players, right? So all I had was that. Been listening to the same thing, and I hit scan on the radio, and it just looped. It just kept looping, and I was just like, if I break down here, I'm screwed. No cell service, and I can't even get a radio station.
No, because that was before iPhones and all that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was. I remember thinking like, yeah, man, if you break down here or you live in one of these areas, like you're screwed if something happens. They don't even have access. You don't have access to water. There's not a lot of, like even here. I bow hunt a lot, so like to your point, like I need water more than I need anything else because I can bow hunt. There's deer, we can find food here, but out there, like hunting's even sort of a limited option,
Yeah, we got deer, we got elk up north, but if things really were to fall apart like that, those animals would be gone so fast.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's interesting because during the Great Depression, the deer population in Alabama was not decimated, but it was reduced significantly because people started hunting even more, and all of a sudden it wasn't just your average hunters; it's everybody, because that's where else are you going to get food from, and it goes away quick.
People's dogs would be gone.
Oh yeah, I'm not eating my dog though. I couldn't do that. I got German Shepherds. I couldn't eat my dog.
No, but somebody else might, John. Somebody else might eat your dogs.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I'll eat a horse. I'm not eating my dogs.
During the Great Depression, then, if all the deer population went down, any idea how long it took to rebuild it?
I'm not really sure. I know that right now, I mean, we have we have so many deer here now, largely due to conservation efforts. So. I don't think it didn't take that long. I don't think, but I know it was decimated pretty bad because just like I said, everybody's hunting and they don't, they're not super slow, but they don't reproduce super quickly either. So a couple of years of people, killing too many doe, and you have a huge problem on your hands.
That's the other thing people don't take into account, where if there was an all-out, not that I'm calling for a collapse, John. In fact, I don't think people in this country have the will to fight for something like that to occur.
No.
But I was talking to a friend of mine about this, the idea there was going to be a civil war at the election, and I said, no. I'm like, I fell for that in 2020. I never envisioned this time around. When you drive around, man, people they have no fight in them.
No, I think I've written about this before. I personally think that any sort of prediction about whether it's a civil war or that has to occur after there's a major collapse. People are too comfortable, and they're not going to give up. They're not going to risk fighting when they can still feed their kids. I think that if all of a sudden you start to see people no longer able to feed their children, that would be the marker of things going bad. I mean, even if you look at the French Revolution or you look at the October Revolution in Russia, a lot of times the women are sort of the marker for that. You know, you see the bread riots and stuff. Once the women can't get food for their kids, they kind of give the go ahead to the men to do whatever. You know, so I always kind of use that as a marker. Like as long as, because most, you know, your wife's happy and all, guys will be like, okay, we'll go along with it. So I think a lot of those predictions, it's like, no, as long as people can get food, if they can get food and watch TV, they're gonna do that. They're not gonna risk their safety and security for anything, really. I don't think.
I can't even get people to move a yoga mat in class, John, and they're gonna arm up and fight.
That's why I always like, and I love my friends, and I'm a gun guy too, but I always find it funny when you see everyone's like, well, we got the Second Amendment, they can't take our rights. I'm like, yeah, but you've had this the whole time. No one's done anything, you know. And I do think it takes a moment of people have to get pushed to that point, you know, and it's not. We would see it coming, I think, before then.
Do you think we're close to it?
I've thought a lot about it, and I can't. I think if there's an economic collapse, yeah, but I think barring like major economic collapse, I don't think so. I think most people will just adjust to, like, if Trump would not have won and Kamala would have won, I think most people would have, unfortunately, they would have just adjusted to it. They would have been upset at first, and you probably would have had some people act out, but for the most part, people would just kind of go along to get along. You know, I just don't. I'm not an economics guy really, but I think to me that's the thing, because if people don't have the money to buy the things they need, then that would push people over the edge. But I don't think anything else would, and that's the only reason I'm not sure if we're close to it, because I think they're going to keep trying. They're going to do everything they can to keep the wheels turning on the sort of the money machine.
I agree, and you know, it's I thought Kamala would win. I thought they stole it in 2020, and they would install her in 24. And I've admitted this, you know, obviously I was wrong, but I thought, okay, she'll win, and the right will be like, oh, this is not fair, they cheated, but nobody will do anything. Mm-hmm. And then I did think that there'd be some flare-ups if Trump was going to win. And this is why, even coming into the inauguration, I don't expect anything, because he won. There's been nothing. If anything, it's been just quiet, eerily quiet. Like mainstream media, yeah, they're squawking a little bit, but not like they were in 2016.
Yeah, no, I think I chalk that a lot up to. I think it's pretty clear, at least to me, that there's a certain subset of the elite that have decided that the best path forward is to go with Trump. And they've pulled so much of their support in that direction that the left is just, they feel defeated. And I think it's the first time they felt defeated enough that they don't really want to put up a fight, if that makes sense. And because I'm a firm believer in elite theory, so I don't think any movement is ever ground up. You know, even if like the American Revolution is really a circulation of the elites. You know, Washington, Jefferson, those guys they're not common people. You know, they're essentially aristocracy that decided they'd had enough with England, and they're going to be in charge, right? And so I think every revolution is just, it's a counter elite coming in and taking charge. And I think what you're seeing now is a lot of people saw the writing on the wall and realized, like, okay, if we want to keep this thing going, we have to get away from, you know, the radical left, so to speak. And I think that's where that PayPal mafia stuff comes into play, right? Is those guys they're more libertarian, more, you know, at least socially libertarian, but they also realize that, like, if you're going to go forward and you want to do great things, you're going to have to get away from what the left is doing. So I think that's why you didn't see and you see this with Zuckerberg recently, right? All of a sudden now he's free speech.
He was on Rogan.
Yeah.
Yesterday or today.
Like, yeah. So it's a, what do they call it? A preference cascade. You know, like, okay, now it's okay to go this way. And they see which way the wind is shifting. And they're going that way. And you even see it with some of the more mainstream conservative talking heads of trying to cut off the more extreme versions of the right, or extreme aspects of the right, because I think they're trying to solidify a certain position, so to speak.
You know, I was literally talking to a friend of mine about this last night, so I'm going to share this with you now, and you tell me what your thoughts. Because I don't know. John, I look at all this, right, and people are like, oh, this is the golden era, and, you got to quit being so negative. But what I can't get out of my head is during COVID, and I fell for it initially. I fell for the fear. And then you start looking at things. You're like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And I feel like we're there right now because everyone's on this Trump bandwagon of like, oh, Greenland, oh, Canada, oh, Gulf of America. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Wasn't this all supposed to be about fixing the United States? And you have big tech that did everything they could to get rid of him in 2020. To your point, they all come in this time around, either endorse him or they stay silent. The left-wing media, like the Washington Post, the LA Times, they don't endorse anybody. Like, everybody just laid down their weapons. And you can't tell me that these people had a moment of clarity or an epiphany and say, oh my God, we were wrong. We want free speech now. I'm just not buying that, especially Zuckerberg.
No, like I said, I think they see which way the winds are shifting, and they realize, like, okay, if we want to maintain control, because I think that most of the time, I think the strategy sort of the powers that be is normally to crush any outside, any growing movement. They will crush it. If they can't crush it, their next option is to co-opt it. And I think that's partly also what you're seeing. It's like, okay, this is where things are going. We can't, maybe I tend to think that when they looked at the numbers, they realized, okay, we could pull a 2020 again, but it was going to be so obvious this time, it's not worth it, right? Like, they didn't have the political capital to pull off two of those elections in a row. So they decided, well, we let him win. We let him win, and then we co-opt the movement. And I tend to think that's more what's going on.
See, I think they co-opted the movement even before the election, and they didn't let the other side cheat this time because they had all the mechanisms in place in key states like Pennsylvania, even though Arizona, I mean, they still didn't let Kerry Lake in on the Senate side. But I feel like they stopped it. And the other thing too, and we'll see how this plays out, JD Vance, that's their guy. Mm-hmm. Like, he came from that world. He's got a kid named Vivek, for God's sake.
Right. Yeah. It's weird though, because I want to like JD Vance, like
me
everything
too.
About him.
I'm an Ohio guy. Like,
yeah, I mean, he was a Marine. I was a Marine as well. So I have, okay, I see that in him. He's from that, that Scotch-Irish background, but at the same time, I can't help but feel like he's more loyal to what these PayPal Mafia guys want than anything else. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't know. I think you're right. I think they intended to co-opt the movement early on. I think they realized that there was nothing they could do to stop him outside of cheating again. And if they did that, I think their concern was, again, they don't have the political capital. You can get away with it once, but the second time you might actually cause, a massive problem. And so it's better to sort of let him win and then, embed yourself within his movement essentially.
Well, that's with, having JD Vance in there early. I mean, that to me solidified that they had taken over because, you see the H-1B visa, he's not going to shoot. Not that he has the authority to shoot that down, but Trump's already been, he's been very vocal about H-1B. These guys, who do they employ? I mean, who are their H-1B? People from India. JD Vance's wife is Indian. Mm-hmm. I believe his wedding was a Hindu wedding. I mean, that stuff matters, in my opinion. Oh, yeah. And as far as I see, I don't know, in 2028, I don't see how he doesn't get in. Because they're going to be behind him. Big Tech will for sure be behind him. I mean, that is their guy. I mean, how does a guy who... I'm going to get so much shit for this, for bringing up the story again. But how does a guy go... And nobody's ever asked him, how do you go from law school to meeting Peter Thiel? And Peter Thiel then takes you... I mean, you write a book that becomes a bestseller, published by Rupert Murdoch's publishing company, made into a movie directed by Ron Howard on Netflix, venture capital company started, funded by Peter Thiel. I mean, this guy not only hit the lottery, man. Like,
yeah, I don't believe in any coincidences. I mean, it would be nice if it was just a little sort of Cinderella story, but I don't buy it, And I think people need to be aware of that, and at the same time realize that, and I've been telling people this for a while. I think Trump winning is not, it's not some great moment that's going to lead to like us winning and taking back the country, but it gives breathing room for people to start, establishing their own networks and building things on their own. Because with Trump in office, sort of the eye of Sauron is turned away a little bit, so they're not paying as much attention to what we're doing. They're worried about other things, and so we might have some shared. We both want America. Like I think the PayPal mafia guys want America to do well, but they want America to do well for different reasons than maybe you or I do, right? Like Elon Musk wants to go to Mars, right? And if DEI is in the way of going to Mars, he wants to get rid of DEI. But that's not because of some principled reason against it. It's just because it stops him from achieving his goals. And so I think we kind of have to look at these PayPal guys or whoever, the tech bros, and realize, okay, they want America to succeed, and that can be beneficial to us, but we have to also be cautious of the path of success they want. Like you said, with the H-1B visas, like that is not good for America long term, and it's not good for the people that live here. So I think we're fellow travelers, but I think a lot of people get too caught up in thinking that, oh, they're on our side now. I'm like, I don't know that they're on your side. You just happen to want a similar goal at the moment. But if we were to get in their way of the goal, they would easily turn against us, I think.
I had an ex-military guy tell me the world is like one big Monopoly board being played by people at the top, and it's the regular people that are the casualties of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's that old saying about, I mean, it applies similarly, and that saying about war is old men talking and young men dying, right? And this is a similar thing. Like those people at the top, they make their geopolitical moves and all, and we're just sort of pawns on that chessboard.
As we've spent 30 minutes talking about what's going on in the world, has it wanted you to, even prior to that, have you thought, oh, maybe my next book will be a modern day?
I've considered it. This is going to sound silly, but one of the hardest parts about writing modern fiction is cell phones, and because people are always on their phones, so it's really hard to write interactions with people without them constantly being on their phones. People don't sit in a bar anymore. They don't sit at the park. They're always just texting and calling. So it makes it difficult, I guess, for me. But I've thought about stuff in the future, but I've had ideas about that. But modern stuff is just, for some reason, and maybe it's something I just need to get past and figure a way to work around. But the cell phone thing really it's like a stumbling block.
I never even thought of that. Well, I mean, from that idea, because people, you're right. You walk into a bar. I haven't walked in a bar in a long time, but people are just sitting there on their phones.
Yeah. Yeah, if you go into a waiting room, people are on their phones. You go anywhere, people are they don't interact anymore. And it makes it kind of hard to write modern, sort of human interaction because of that.
Did you see the movie Nosferatu?
Not yet. I need to. I told my wife we're probably going to go see it if I can get my mother-in-law if I can dump the kids on my mother-in-law.
I can't wait. I'm hoping I can go this weekend. But I watched an interview with that director. I think it's Nicholas Eggers is his name?
Yeah, Edgar's, yeah.
And he was talking about same thing with the modern day. He's like, I'm never going to make a movie in modern day because I don't want to film a cell phone.
Yeah. I mean, it also creates just a massive problem. Like, me and my wife have recently been rewatching Frasier because like it's something. This is most stuff is trash, and it's you put on the background. It's a good show, and I always tell her all the time, like half of these storylines fall apart with cell phones because they rely on people having information and going to do things and whatever. Nowadays, you just text people, you just call them, problem solved. It creates I think a issue for writers in general.
Yeah, I've been rewatching some of The Sopranos.
Mm.
And
I haven't seen that show. Yeah,
you saw it? You ever saw it?
Well, no, I haven't seen it in forever. I was like, man, I need to go back and rewatch that. It's hard. It's hard with the kids in the house though, because it's
Balancing
not
it
a
all, right?
family-friendly show.
They had an episode with stolen calling cards. Do you remember you
Mm.
had to use calling cards if you
Yeah.
made an international phone call?
Oh yeah. Man, yeah, you couldn't do that now. It reminds me of I was actually explaining to my oldest son. He's 11. I was explaining him to remember the collect call commercials. They'd be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
COLATT or whatever," and they, you had to. I was telling him like, "Yeah, you had payphones, and you had to," and he was mind blown by that. And then I had to explain to him they used to have phones on the wall, which he's never seen a phone on the wall before. Because he was like, wait, and I was like, no, the phones used to be in the house on the wall, and there's a cord, and he was just like confused. So
Yeah, it's you look back at periods of time like World War II. That's why I was hoping for the next James Bond. I wanted them to go back to what the origin of that story was.
yeah, there was rumors on the internet for a while that Christopher Nolan might do the Batman, or not Batman, but do the James Bond, and that they were going to set it back in the '60s. Because I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Have you
Never
ever
saw
seen
it.
that? It was Guy Ritchie did it,
Oh,
and
with
it
Henry
had
Cavill. Henry
yeah,
Cavill.
Henry Cavill. And I always tell people that was the best Bond movie made in the last 20 years because it feels like a Bond film, but it's set in the '60s, and I would love to see them go back and do that.
Well, especially with that character, with the P gun, and in today's modern era, it's just run its course. And is that your favorite period of time? What is your favorite?
I have a couple. I really like the interwar years, in between World War I and World War II. And then I like the post World War II from about, around the time of the Korean War up until the '70s. Those are my two favorite periods because I think there's a vitality, especially if you're writing about America during both of those time periods. Post World War One, America's making a lot of growth and change, and things are changing rapidly. And then in post World War Two, America's sort of at the top, and everything is changing rapidly. And also, like from an aesthetic point of view, I really like the style. I think there's something about the cars, the clothes, everything about that early '50s, late '40s era. But I also grew up. I lived with my grandparents for a long time, and we either watched John Wayne movies or we watched old noir films. So for me, I grew up on James or either John Wayne or basically Humphrey Bogart. So that's probably partly why.
That show off in your book? I feel like that I got that sense reading Crimson Veil.
Yeah, that was I wanted it is really a noir. It's a sort of a southern noir is what I would call it. Because I've always loved the noir genre because I like the grittiness of it. And I think that also that genre gives you the opportunity to tell story like really human stories where everybody's flawed, you know. And so that was really, and then of course I think I don't know if you've read any Southern Gothic, but like when you're reading Faulkner or Flannery O'Connor, there's also a darkness in that, and I kind of wanted to marry the two genres.
When you say grittiness, I interpret that based on reading your work. It's kill or be killed,
Hmm.
and also
Well,
staying off
yeah,
the radar. In I didn't mean to cut you off. Staying off the radar in a sense of keeping yourself alive by staying off the radar by certain people you just don't fuck with.
yeah, and I took a lot of inspiration from an area down here. A lot of people when you think of like the history of like organized crime in America, people think of the Italians. They think of you have black gangs, you have the Italians, the Irish mob. A lot of people don't realize there was something called the Dixie Mafia, and the Dixie Mafia was the mafia down here in the South, and they were all across the South. They were based out of Biloxi, Mississippi, and they ran everything. Um, and there are towns. There's even a town called Phoenix City in Alabama that the entire town was run by the Dixie Mafia. They even laundered the money in the courthouse, the basement of the courthouse. And so I looked at that town and I said, well, when you look at Chicago or New York, you're like, okay, there's areas of these cities that are dangerous, but what about a city that the entire thing is the mafia? And that's the way some of these towns were. Everything from the money that was passed in the church pews to everything was run by the mob. And if you were a person that tried to do anything decent, you were running the risk. I mean, because they own the sheriff. One of these towns down here, the sheriff would go around and he would pick up girls that were out by themselves, and they'd arrest them, and he would charge them, and then they would say, well, if you want to get out of prison, you have to basically be a prostitute for a certain amount of time, and nobody can do anything when the sheriff's doing that. So I wanted to look at a place like that. So I kind of took all those stories that I had heard growing up and kind of molded them into a town. Because in the book, the town is called Acadia, which isn't an actual town in Alabama. It's just sort of an amalgamation of all these different places within the state from that time period.
Yeah, and the main character, J.D. Hooks, it was like he was born into a no-win situation. Mm-hmm. Am I interpreting that correctly?
No, yeah, because a lot of the theme of the book that I kind of wrestle with is this idea that like the sins of the father are passed down onto the son, and you carry sort of the sins of not just the father, but the sins of your family are kind of passed to you. And I wanted to wrestle with this idea of, if you're born into this no-win situation, you're sort of you're dealing with these crimes or these issues that are passed from your father or your family in general. How do you get past that? And in my opinion, the idea of redemption the idea is that redemption has to be paid for with blood, essentially. And that the only way out of that is you have to be willing to essentially give up everything in order to sort of redeem yourself. So that's sort of that's really the driving theme sort of behind the novel, is this idea of redemption and what it costs, and that true redemption might cost you risking your life, essentially.
And even in the beginning, where his father had died and he wanted to be an attorney and he wasn't willing to play ball with Orrin, and he gets his ass kicked for it, and he has to, at that point, choose a different path.
Yeah, but I kind of wanted to, and if you noticed, I wanted to give him the opportunity where he could have played ball. He could have just gone along to get along. But as a character, Hooks, and I probably took this inspiration from how I kind of am. I've always had an impulse to just I have very much a disagreeable personality. So if I want to do something and somebody tells me, well, you're going to do this thing that I was already going to do, I will, my impulse is to not do it now because you told me to. So I kind of wanted to show the childish nature of sort of that mentality, because, and as it goes along the book, there's a lot of character development, but in the beginning, he is a man who, he doesn't say no out of principle. It's not because he's principled and doesn't want to get involved. He just says no because he doesn't want to be told what to do, And so I kind of wanted to show that the struggle that and I think a lot of guys have that struggle, it's like you're being disagreeable or you're pushing back against something just for the sake of it, if that makes sense.
Well, and it's reading it, I was trying to visualize what he looks like, and I'm one of those people, man. If there's a movie first, if there's a movie in a book, I always watch the movie. That way, when I go back and read the book, I know what the characters look like. So I was trying to think in my mind. I'm like, okay, what is JD? What kind of character? From what type of movie? Just so because he strikes me as almost like 48 Hours, Nick Nolte from the original 48 Hours, like a guy who's drinks a lot, smokes, wakes up, puts on a sports jacket, doesn't shower, and just grinds all day.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He's sort of, I kind of think that's a good idea, or a good representation would be Nick Nolte. I also kind of think of a more grizzled version of, if you've ever seen it's an old Harrison Ford movie called Frantic.
Been a long time.
Yeah, I kind of picture him somewhere in between those two. He's a little more. He takes care of himself a little bit more than somebody like you think of Nick Nolte in 48 Hours.
Or Bruce
But
Willis,
that's
or Bruce Willis in The Last Boy Scout.
yeah, yeah. Or like even he's probably a little worse off than John McClane in Die Hard, right? Like McClane's not the most, but I was kind of thinking, he's in between these two because he is a veteran. He's a World War II veteran, and this takes place in the early 50s, so it's been a while since the war. So he's in his early 40s, but he's just kind of a tired. He's a tired individual who's kind of not given up on life, but he's going through the motions of everything, and life hasn't turned out the way he wanted it to, because even as a character, he's a lawyer who never wanted to really be a lawyer, and he struggles with that, right? He struggles with this idea that his father had groomed him to be a lawyer, and he thought that was his dream. But and this is something I also kind of tackle in the book, which is how much of our own dreams are something that was given to us before we were even born. If your father wanted you to be a lawyer, and from the time you were a kid, he's been pushing you that direction, you think that's what you want until you get it. And then with his father's death, he's sort of struggling with this idea of like, well, that was never even my dream. It was a dream that was just given to me. And I think that's part of why he is the way he is, because he's been given this sort of path in life that was never his in the first place, or he never had a say so in it.
And yet, you realize, at least I didn't realize when I was in my 20s, I never thought this, and I'll be 47 in May, and life isn't a straight line. You think it's going to be a straight line, but that's just not the way it works.
Oh, no. I tell my son all the time, like, most people fall into their line of work, like people don't grow up from the time they're kids and dream of being an accountant. They kind of get that, they get there somehow, right? But it's not like you're 6 and Billy wants to be a police officer and you want to be an accountant. That's usually not how that works. But like I said, I was kind of fascinated with this idea as I was writing it, about how much of our personality is sort of passed to us, or the things that we want in life are given to us prior to us even existing, because Jung had this famous line that the greatest tragedy to befall a child is the life of an unlived parent. Right. So how many parents push the things on their children because they didn't do them, at their own detriment.
And he also struggles with the morality, right? Because he's somebody that, like, correct me here. This is my interpretation. He wants to do good, but yet he does very questionable things. Like it's like when Evelyn comes to him, which it's laid out the whole what the book is about for people, and I encourage everybody to go buy it. But when that opportunity presents itself to him for her sister, he's caught because like the money is so good that he doesn't want to turn it down, and yet he knows, again, it comes back to you're fucking with people that you shouldn't be fucking with, right? Am I right by saying that?
No, you're right, exactly, because he's torn between what he wants to do and sort of what he needs to do, right? Like he knows when she comes to him, immediately picks up on the fact that something's not right. But instead of walking away from it like he probably should, or like he thinks to himself, he wants the money, right? Just like, and this is sort of a theme that runs through that, is he has a moral compass that he denies based on what he wants to do. His wants always supersede that, and he has to sort of come to terms with this idea of like, you're gonna have to be principled at some point, and I kind of point that out at some, in the book. I wanted to drive this point home of like, Principles are principles, whether people want them to be or not. So if you live your life by chasing your own wants, because I just want to do things, well, that is your principles. So he's still driven by that. And it gets him into trouble, of course, right? Because there's many opportunities where what he should do and what he wants to do are in conflict, and he doesn't quite have the moral compass to, or the sort of the intestinal fortitude to say no and deny himself.
Because the goal for him is to get out, right? I mean, the whole
Mm-hmm.
fictional finalism. If he can just get enough money and get out of there and get out of Acadia, then everything will be fine.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. If he can just, it's I can just leave here and I can leave all this behind, right? Which, again, I don't, I try to kind of show that with him. It's like, well, can you really do that? And I haven't kind of struggled with that idea, because can you really just walk away from something scot-free? Is that even possible? Or are you going to carry that with you, or is it going to come back to bite you in the ass?
How so if you were to see this become a movie, who would you want to play him?
Oh God, that would be hard. Because right now, a friend of mine that wrote a review on it recently told me that he kept thinking of it as a sort of like a True Detective. He was like, if they did a new season of True Detective, it would work for this book. So I keep thinking of Matthew McConaughey, even though I don't think he would fit the character at all. But have you seen True Detective?
I never watched that show.
Um, Matthew McConaughey's character is who I would see him being, but not. I couldn't see McConaughey playing him. He's not. He's not quite physical. He doesn't have the physicality, I don't think, to pull that off. It's so hard because, like, I'm not a fan of a lot of modern actors. So it's hard for me to think of a modern actor that would work. But oh man, I mean, I could cast the main sort of antagonist with Oren. I definitely see as Vincent D'Onofrio is who I picture playing that if I was casting it ideally, right? Because he just has that presence, especially as he's gotten bigger. He's just a physical presence. I think though, like, if I don't know, I think if somebody like Chris Pratt could do gritty and dark, I would go with him. Actually, I have you seen the new Batman?
Hated it. Sorry.
Robert
I
Pattinson.
saw it. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
well,
Did you like
outside
that
of that,
movie? Did you like that
I
movie?
thought I liked elements of it. I didn't like the whole movie. I hated the third act. I thought the third act was terrible. But I think sort of something similar to that, what Robert Pattinson was channeling, I think that could work, if that makes sense. Because that was sort of a noir film.
Yeah, you know what? My favorite parts in that was with Colin Farrell, and he was barely in it.
Mm.
And I had a hard time. I saw no chemistry with him, Pattinson, and Zoe Kravitz.
Oh no, yeah.
And then the fact that John Turturro was her dad, I couldn't. I mean, he was Jesus from The Big Lebowski. I just wasn't. I wasn't. I just wasn't buying that.
Yeah, I don't know. That was the best choice. I like the film more for the atmosphere than the film itself. I think I liked it because, again, I'm a big fan of noir. I like the dark, the gritty. Um, I've always, I even like the original. I think was it the theatrical version of Blade Runner with the voiceover, because I like the old. Ryan Gosling could play him. There you go. You could have Ryan Gosling from the new Blade Runner, the last Blade
2049.
Runner movie.
2049. That
Yeah.
was a great movie, man.
Oh yeah, fantastic movie, and that would fit pretty well with what him as a character. You
Yeah,
know.
I could. I've rewatched that. It's funny, I saw both Dunes, and I have no desire to watch those again. But Blade Runner 2049,
Mm.
I've seen a few times. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah, I've watched it. I don't even know how many times. It's a movie I'll put on just for background noise because I like it. So if I'm doing something in the house, I'll have it on. But I think he could play that because it's a very similar. He's a character that doesn't really care about anything. To a degree, and I think that would work for Hooks, because Hooks cares. He's sort of half in, half out, right? He cares enough to try a little bit, but he doesn't care enough to really put his full effort into things. And that, of course, as the novel progresses, that's one of the things that does come full circle on him, is his inability to commit, his full attention to one thing or the other.
Who would you play Evelyn?
Okay. Oh, that's so. I would have her. Have you seen what's her name? Diane Kruger,
No.
Inglorious Bastards. She played the female, the German in Inglorious
The
Bastards.
movie theater girl?
No, no, no. The German girl that helps that helps them that helps the Americans out.
With the one that ran the movie theater, the real.
No, that's the French girl.
Oh, that's a French girl. Oh, to the blonde that what's
Yeah,
his
the
name? The
blonde.
what's his name? He chokes her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
her. Yeah, I think she would work because she can pull off that sort of look of the sort of stereotypical damsel. The girl walks into the private investigator's office. The sort of blonde bombshell sort of character.
Are you happy with the way the book is? How you finished it? Completed?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think it turned out really well. I've had the few people that have finished it or read it early on. I think one of the best feedback I received was them telling me they couldn't predict the ending, which I think was the best part because I can usually pick the plot out of a film pretty early on, and multiple people told me that I had no idea what was going to happen all the way up into the end, which I think was one of the hardest parts, because we've all seen so many films and read so many books. It's hard to catch people off guard without it, And it's not that it's not like a Fight Club thing where I was trying to dupe the audience, like, "Ha, gotcha, see," but I didn't want it to be predictable. So I think that has made me really satisfied with how it's turned out.
Yeah, and I think to your point, what you said earlier, you have to focus on these past periods of time now for your best stories.
Yeah, I think they also give us the freedom, to because so much of stuff nowadays is clouded. Whether it's through, I think part of it is because there's like a crisis of meaning. So when you're writing characters from the past, it's a lot easier to have them believe in things, whether it's patriotism or God, religion, whatever. Those characters have more freedom to be people who believe, whereas like modern characters, so many people nowadays don't really believe in anything, and I think it's a lot harder to tell good stories when you have people who don't believe in anything, if that makes sense.
How much of your own personality, your own life experience got incorporated in this book and some of the characters?
Probably quite a lot. I mean, I relate to a lot of Hooks as a character comes from my own experience of how I kind of felt and navigated the world coming back or getting out of the military. I went to Afghanistan twice, and I went through a phase where when I got out, I didn't really care about anything. I wasn't necessarily doing anything wrong, but I was just kind of floating around doing whatever. And so a lot of the way Hooks is interacting with the world is sort of how I think for myself, and I think a lot of veterans, especially ones who've seen combat, kind of have a similar reaction. You're kind of numb to the world, and you kind of just navigate it. And then of course, because I've grown up here my whole life, a lot of the characters are sort of an amalgamation of all the different people. I've seen all these people or similar people my whole life, so um, it's definitely, and I also often wonder how much of it's subconscious too. You think you're creating something new when really you're pulling so much from your own experience you don't even realize.
What do you think the future of Hollywood is? Because to me, it feels like no one will take risks anymore. It's just the same old thing, same old thing.
Well, honestly, I think when it comes now for Hollywood, I think that Hollywood's number is up almost. But I think for the
It might,
future of
might,
film,
might literally be burned to the ground, John. Not to be.
yeah, physically, like literally, and spiritually gone. But I think for the future of filmmaking, it's actually very positive because I think the technology through whether it's through the cameras on cell phones or um, through AI technology where you can sort of do some of the special effects on your own. I think the future of filmmaking is bright because the barrier of entry to creating great films is dramatically reduced now. So I think with Hollywood declining, we actually might see a lot better films where people don't need the same amount of capital, and the barriers of entry are removed, and you can actually tell real stories.
How will you proceed with Crimson Veil? Is that something that you'll look at doing?
Well, right now my plan is actually I'm thinking of writing. I'm thinking of writing a sequel that's not a sequel. Where I'm thinking about writing another story that takes place around the same time in Acadia that does not feature Hooks as a character, but having a third book where the main protagonist from this next novel and Hooks are together in the same book. So it's sort of it would be a trilogy where you could read the first two books in any order you wanted. It wouldn't matter. But the third book would be their stories together in some capacity.
Have you started that already?
I have notes on it. I haven't started on it yet. And I have a half-finished manuscript from a book I was writing. It was more geared towards younger guys because I wanted to write something my sons could read. And it's about river pirates post-Civil War in Alabama, and a father and son. A father goes missing, and his son goes to look for him and winds up traversing the rivers of the Southeast with river pirates. So that's something that I haven't decided which one I'm going to tackle first.
I never heard of river pirates after the Civil War.
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, there were river pirates all across the Southeast. I mean, even way before the Civil War, because so the way that a lot of goods were moved throughout the South and Southeast was through rivers. Early on, it was flatboats. So you go upriver, and they'd build these big flatboats, and they just required somebody to basically use a long piece of wood to keep it in the middle of the river, and they would just float down to the next place. And then of course you get steamboats, right? But in between all this time period, there were pirates on the river, just like there were pirates on the sea, and they would float down the river, and they would look for people moving stuff, goods, ships full of, whether it was cotton or whatever, and they would rob them the same way. And there's is it called the Bloody Bucket? There's one I think it's near Ohio actually, but it's a famous cave where river pirates would hang out all the time. And it was like a tavern. And I want to say it's called the Bloody Bucket or something, but either river pirates were a big thing. And then post Civil War, you had some of them because, like I said, that's how you moved everything throughout the Southeast, was whether it's the Mississippi River or the Tennessee River. You have these giant waterways that are basically highways, and they would hide out in the bushes, and they would wait till night, and they would rob you, or they would pretend that their boat was wrecked, and you'd stop to help them, and they'd jump out and steal all your stuff. So
how did they get stopped? So there was fighting then going on at that point.
Oh yeah, I mean they would, during the it's just because the river wasn't really, you have these rivers, and there's giant spaces where there's nobody there. So if you're floating down the river and you're moving stuff from point A to point B, and some guys are hiding out and they wait for you to come by and they just steal it. Again, like the same way pirates on the high seas would operate. But as the America grew and these municipalities got more power and stuff, they were able to snuff it out. And then of course, as more roads got developed, it became less lucrative to move stuff down the river. So it kind of just went away on its own.
So this would be a story about a father and son?
Yes. Yeah.
They would be the river pirates, or they would be encountering river pirates?
No. So the first chapter was published as a short story originally called The Weight of Steel. Double Dealer magazine published it. And then on Substack, there's a magazine on Substack called the Virginia Gentry, and they published it as well. But it's about a father and son, and the father goes missing. He goes out to check traps, and he doesn't come back, and the son goes to look for him. And the story was supposed to evolve into he can't find his father, so he goes to find his father's brother, who they were in the Civil War together, the brothers, and the other brother decided when he came back from the war, and he got to basically go be a river pirate. He got involved with river pirates. So the kid has to go find his uncle, who is a river pirate, and then they sort of go on together to try to find his father. So I was going to use it as a vehicle to have sort of them journey across the southeast along these rivers, um, while also incorporating some magical realism. I wanted to use some of the sort of the myths and legends of the South that they encounter along the way going down these rivers, because we have a lot of old folklore down here, whether it's, giant alligators in the river. There's a legend of a ghost ship that they used to sail up and down. I think it's the Chattahoochee or the Mississippi River. I don't remember. So I was going to kind of use this as a journey across the South, if that makes sense.
So it'd be like a ghost ship with actual ghosts, like tied
Yeah.
into so it'd be it'd be a fantasy.
Yeah, it'd be kind of a blend of like he goes off on this journey, and as he goes on this journey, they encounter all these things that are basically the folk tales. Like the folk tales of the old South are real, and they're encountering them as they go on.
What kind of weaponry would they have? Just a revolver or a musket?
Revolver. I mean, in the short story, it was a Sharps repeating rifle that his father had took off a Yankee soldier during the war, is what he has with him. So they would just be post Civil War, muskets, early pistols, stuff like that.
Yeah, I always like the Dark Tower series, with Stephen King taking that Wild West format, but yet it was a futuristic Wild West, and I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, this would be kind of, it would be similar in the sense that it would be pre Wild West, right? So we haven't got quite to the Colt revolver and all, but you have the Civil War era weaponry, but then there would be the supernatural element. Like I said, it would kind of be like the Odyssey, right? Where like Odysseus is traveling, trying to get back to Ithaca, and he keeps encountering all these different, the Cyclops and Calypso. It would be basically the Odyssey in that sense. But this boy's encountering, instead of Greek mythology, it's all this mythology from the old South. So it'd be a combination of the stories from the settlers and the people that settled Alabama and Georgia and all, but also the Native American mythology as well. So instead of encountering a Cyclops, they would be encountering, Native American monsters or something like that from their legends.
Chris Nolan's next movie is The Odyssey.
Yeah, I saw that recently. Yeah, I think I hope it's going to be good, because I like the TV version from back in like the 90s. So
I don't think I ever saw that. Yeah, I'm kind of mixed on him, but although in fairness, I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet.
Have you seen No Country, or not No Country for Old Men?
I love No Country for Old Men.
Oh, Brother, Where Art Thou?
I never saw that, and people give me heat for that, but no. I like the Coen Brothers a lot, too.
Well, it's the Odyssey. It's a sort of a retelling of the Odyssey. So I guess it'd be kind of similar to that, because if you watch the film and you know the Odyssey, you see it. John Goodman's the Cyclops. He's got one eye. They run into the sirens. Like, it's the Odyssey, but it's set in like 1930s Mississippi.
Sounds really cool. I mean, are you leaning that way, or?
Yeah, that's sort of, that was the when I formulated the idea, I thought I wanted to mythologize early American folklore in the same way the Odyssey was done, because that was where the original idea came from. And then I started it with I was like, well, if Odysseus is trying to get back to his wife in Ithaca, what if instead of that the father is missing and the son is going to find the father, and then basically have the Odyssey, but an Americanized version of it. So, but that was sort of the inspiration.
Will that be next, you think?
I don't know, because
it sounds amazing, John.
The problem is, I don't know how to say this without, I give my wife gives me a hard time, because if I start talking about like writing and literature, she's like, you sound like an art homo. That's what she always says. because I'll get really into it. Because I do believe in the muse. Like the muse has to strike you. And when I was writing that at first, I was really into it, and then it just went away.
Hmm.
And so if I have that and I'm in it and I want to write it, I will. But if not, I don't want to force it. So when I started writing the story of Hooks, JD Hooks, it hit me and I was in it the whole time. It never waned. So I don't want to jump into it and like half-ass it because I'm not committed. So I'm not sure which one will come first, but I will write that story because I think it has a lot of potential. But I'm kind of going to decide how Crimson Veil is received. I might tackle that sequel first.
What do you think about modern movies today? You said you haven't seen Nosferatu yet?
No, but I've seen Edgar's other films. I've seen The Witch, and I forget what the other ones were.
I never saw any of his.
The Lighthouse.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any of his work yet, or The Northman.
Oh, Northman's good. I liked all of them. I mean, he's really artistic. His movies are a little strange. I think modern films and modern stories in general, fiction is this way too. The literature scene is horrible. It's horrendous. At least if you go into Barnes and Noble, just go look at what's for sale. You'll see how horrible it is. But people can't tell real stories because real stories are based in truth, and you have to lie about everything nowadays, right? You have to have a female protagonist that can, one of the examples I always use, and I've gotten this compliment a lot, which is that people tell me I write female characters really well. And I think the only reason I do that is because I understand the difference between male power and female power. Like women don't operate through physical violence and threats of violence. They're much more manipulative, right? Female power comes from being able to manipulate, control, being able to use their assets to their advantage. If you look at modern films, they don't know how to show strong female characters because they only picture strong female characters as males. So she's got to be able to fight. She's got to be tough. And if you look at that,
what is that? Boss bitches
yeah.
type of,
yeah. She's got to be a boss bitch. She can't be an actual woman who uses her, manipulates the men around her or plays, sort of backroom dealings. She has to be a man essentially. And I think that's because we can't be honest. And if you extrapolate that idea and you apply it to everything within every archetype, you see that people can't tell good stories because they can't be honest about anything. Because you have to lie about every single part of a story, And I think at the end of the day, good stories are just communicating truths about the world. So if you're lying, you can't write good fiction. And I think fiction, most people, the way they view the world is through stories. And a lot of people will say, oh, fiction isn't really important. We need to be reading more theory or whatever. And I think that stuff's important too. But fiction is how most people see the world. The stories that they're told as children or adults is how the world is perceived to them. If you ask most Americans about William Wallace, they don't think about William Wallace as a real person. They think of Braveheart. And that informs their entire perception of that person and that character and the story of Scottish independence or whatever. That's because that's more powerful than the truth, so to speak. So I think, they can't write good stories because they can't tell the truth. And I think because of that, it gives a lot of ground for people like myself to tell good stories because there's not a lot of competition. And I think more people need to realize the power of those stories. So more guys do that. And they start doing that and putting out, compelling fiction that can tell the truth about the world.
Do you think there's a movement occurring with that now?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of, a lot of the circles I kind of swim in online with writers. They're writing better stuff than anything you're going to buy in Barnes and Noble. But it's impossible for them to get published because publishers, they have their quotas and stuff. And if you're a white guy, good luck getting published at a major publisher, right? And so
unless you're JD Vance, John.
Yeah, but if you're trying to write fiction, like you're not there, it's not going to happen. But because of that, all that talent is going to go somewhere.
If you meet Peter Thiel at law school
Well,
and write a book
well,
about being a hillbilly in Ohio. You'll be a bestseller and you'll be vice president.
I don't want to think about the things you might have to do with Peter Thiel to get him to give you money. So,
Right.
I mean, he's not a fan of the ladies, so I'm not. But yeah, I think there's a lot of great writers out there. There's people like T.R. Hudson comes to mind, who's written two really good books. He wrote Automaton, and his latest book was called The Something and the Wicked. But it's a retelling of sort of the JFK, the Kennedy family story. It's a fictionalized version of the Kennedy family and their rise to power. Really, really good stuff. And there's a publication called The Double Dealer that's publishing a lot of short stories from guys on the internet, and I think they're doing good work as well. So I think it's a growing sphere, but the novel is in a bad spot right now. People just don't read, so it is a tough sell, because you're competing with television and film. So, but the potential's out there.
Yeah, I think as we sit here, the alt media, the movement now going in that direction. I think it's this, and I could be wrong here, but based on my conversation with you and with Crimson Veil, I think there's another movement happening where people do want good stories and they want truth associated with that and those periods. I was just saying to somebody, I was watching. Don't judge me for this, John. I was watching Pretty Woman not long ago, and I love that movie. I don't know. It's one of those movies that carried with me from like middle school to now.
Yeah.
And there's just not even any actors or actresses like stars today. Like there's no Julia
Oh, no.
Roberts. There's no.
Mm-mm. Well, I think that's just because of because the internet gives everybody has their own thing. It's impossible to have everybody tuned into the same thing at the same time. Like when we were growing up, everybody knew who Michael Jackson was, right? Or you had a handful of actors, but now it's just no one's attention can be focused in one spot. So they're like somebody pointed this out to me a while back. They said if you look at the movie stars that still exist, they're the same movie stars that existed in the year 2000. It's still Brad Pitt. It's still Tom Cruise.
Leonardo DiCaprio,
Yeah, those are the only
Denzel, and
people.
Denzel Washington.
Yeah, those are the only names that sell films now. Anybody after that, that's not. It doesn't work that way. So I think that's just because you can't get all the eyes on one screen anymore.
There's no Julia Roberts out there now. I mean,
Mm-mm.
maybe Margot Robbie, but she's not her.
No, not at the same level. Like Julia Roberts was America's sweetheart. She was all over everything. But and even now, like our attention spans are so fried. How long was Julia Roberts everywhere? A decade. Margot Robbie has what, maybe a couple of years, and then they'll move past her. So I don't think I think movie stars, and maybe it's a good thing that maybe the directors or the writers will take center focus, and people will be like with Eggers. After seeing The Northman and I didn't really like The Witch that much, but The Lighthouse, I was on board to watch anything else he made because I was like, oh, it'll be good. So it might be that maybe the actors will take a back seat to the material itself.
That's how I feel about Villanueva right now.
Yeah. My only issue with him is he has beautifully shot films. Like Dune is just the cinematography in all his movies is so good.
And the musical scores attached to it.
Oh yeah. My only problem was what he did to the second Dune movie. He butchered the story so bad. Which if you've never read Dune, the ending of the book is much different than what the film did. And they screwed up the ending of Dune so bad that the Dune Messiah, which is the second book, they would have to rewrite that whole story to make it work because of what they did at the end of the film. So, and I don't know why he did that. I don't know if that was the studio that made him do that or what. But
Wasn't it Frank Herbert? Didn't he want the way the movie ended? Wasn't that his intention to end it that way? But he didn't do it for whatever reason. Somebody told me
well,
that. I didn't read the book, so
no, it's not so much that part. It's so like in the book, Chani is fully aware of like so in the movie she gets all pissed off that he's going to be with the princess and
yeah.
she like storms off. In the book, he tells her, he says he basically tells the emperor, he says like I'm going to marry your daughter. I'm never going to give you children with her. I'm not sleeping with her. She's not really my wife. He's just doing that to get the title. Chani is his real, like she's on board with it because he's going to have kids with her, and she's going to stay as basically his wife. And the mom tells Chani essentially that that's where the real power is. And this goes back to my point earlier. They can't write female characters because in Dune, in the book, the female characters use their cunning and their ability to manipulate for power. They took that whole thing out. Instead, we're like, oh, Chani's got to storm off into the desert. But in reality, in the book, she's on board with all that because she understands her position. Like, I'm going to have the children. I'm going to be his actual wife. I just don't have the title, right? But they butchered all that, and I think it was probably because they didn't want to. They thought it was like misogynistic or something, you know. But like it was little things like that changed the story so much that when you go into Dune Messiah, you now have to rewrite Dune Messiah because, well, she didn't run off into the desert. She has kids with Paul, right? They have children. That's the big plot point in Messiah. But now you've changed the whole story. So,
you know what? One of my favorite movies with him was Sicario.
Oh yeah, Sicario was great. I didn't like the second one as much.
See, though. I thought that was okay.
It was all right, yeah. But the first one, the dialogue with what's his name, Benicio del Toro's character, especially the ending scene where he tells her, this is the land of wolves.
I love that scene, man.
that part is fantastic, but
because because it was real. Like you feel like that's the world we're living in today, where he's like. Mm-hmm. I couldn't when I watched it for the first time. I had to rewatch that scene because I was like, "What?" I couldn't understand what he was saying, and then I finally Googled it to mm-hmm. with the exact words. But he was like, "You should move to a small town where the rule of law exists. What is it? You're not a wolf, and this is the land of wolves now." And then she comes out there on the balcony, points a gun at him, and he stands there, and she won't do it.
Yeah, he knows. He knows she can. And this is the theme you actually see in. You see it in No Country for Old Men and a lot of McCarthy's work, which is that there are these areas on the periphery of society where you have to have a certain kind of man. Like, it's not for civilized people. Like, civilization can't be here. And you see that in No Country for Old Men, right, where Tommy Lee Jones' character, it's changed. It's not for him anymore. He doesn't have what it takes to compete with these people. And I think that theme sort of applies there. And that could apply to America in the future, right? Because if it gets to that point, you're going to have people that think, well, this is the law. And it's like, well, it doesn't work that way anymore. The law doesn't apply here, not in the way that we think of it, but I think that was the best thing that, what's his name ever did. The guy that does Yellowstone. I can't think of his name.
Oh, Taylor.
Sheridan. Yeah. Yeah. I think that movie was good. Hell or High Water was good. I wasn't a fan of Yellowstone though. I think he's one of those writers that when he's constrained by the studio, he does really well. But when they gave him free reign, he just goes off the rails, I think.
Yeah, No Country for Old Men to me. I know we could probably get in the end. I could talk to you for 3 hours about these types of movies. Tom Luongo I had on during Christmas. I had my regulars. I'm like, let's just talk about movies. We can talk about Armageddon. Yeah. We can talk about nuclear war. All of that, into the new year. But No Country for Old Men to me, one of how that movie starts off, it's all about the money. It's all about the $2 million. And then by the end of the movie, the money doesn't matter anymore. It's irrelevant. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an interesting one because it sort of pulls this bait and switch because most people go into the film, if you haven't read the book, which I read the book, but you go in the film and you think that Llewellyn's the main character. You don't realize until the end that the main character is actually Tommy Lee Jones. It's not about Llewellyn. That's why Llewellyn dies off screen. Because it doesn't matter. Does he
die the same way in the book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he just dies.
By the cartel or whatever?
Yeah, but it doesn't even show it or describe it. Right? Because what McCarthy's the real story, the reason it's No Country for Old Men, right? Is because it's not a place for these guys. The times have changed. The cartels are here now. It's no country for you anymore. Tommy Lee Jones is a step behind. It's not about him anymore. He can't keep up, right? And even Llewellyn's character, who kind of shares a similar thing with J.D. Hooks, which is Llewellyn. It's actually Llewellyn's morality that gets him killed. Because if you remember in the movie, he goes back to give water to the Mexican guy. If he would have never gone back to give water, nothing would have happened to him. But he can't live with himself, so he's got to do the right thing, because even for him, and he's a Vietnam vet and all that, but he's too kind to survive in this world. And I think that was what was interesting, is like, I knew a lot of people that were like, he just dies, what happens? And I'm like, because it's not about him, but you don't realize that until you're watching it, like, oh, it's, and that's sort of, and you see that carried through. And then of course the final monologue with Tommy Lee Jones, you see sort of McCarthy's wrestles with nihilism, but the ending monologue is Tommy Lee Jones has the dream about his father carrying the fire, because he's saying, yeah, your time's up, but somebody else is going to carry that fire. He's going to go on past you regardless. So, I mean, that's Cormac McCarthy's probably my favorite, I guess, contemporary writer, if you call him contemporary.
Well, there's also that scene prior where he goes and visits that, I forgot his name, the old guy who only made a pot of coffee once a week.
Yeah.
And he says to him something along the lines of, the world's hard on people or something. And that's where you see the shift, right? Well, and before that, though, when he goes, here's the thing I don't understand, and I know that we'll wrap up here. Sorry if I'm talking your ear off about this. But here's the thing I don't understand in that movie, where Tommy Lee Jones goes back into the hotel room where the scene of the crime was, and you see Javier Bardem, you assume he's in there with him somewhere, and yet Tommy Lee Jones looks around and then sits on the bed, and that's the end of the scene.
Yeah, because the way I've always sort of interpreted that is, assuming Javier Bardem's in the room, right? He could go look for him, but he's not going to. He's kind of, because again, Tommy Lee Jones is tired and he's worn out and he's one step behind. If he was younger and more capable, he probably would have caught. He probably would have was saved Llewellyn, but he's always one step behind because he just does it. He's not really into it. He's not committed to it, And I think he purposely steps away from it because he knows he's about to retire. I think, but he represents that old cowboy that still believes in like this principled version of things. And I think that part of the film is him coming to terms with the fact that like he doesn't have a place here anymore. And I think that's the moment he kind of realizes. And I think he also has a crisis of conscience where he realizes like, I probably could have saved Llewellyn if I would have, really committed to this and gone full into it.
And you assume the wife, does the book show that the wife does die?
It's the same way. He talks with her and then he leaves and he wipes McCarthy describes him wiping his feet on the carpet or on the welcome mat, and he leaves, which, I mean, it implies that she's dead, but
And then he gets hit by a car and just walks down the street. There's never any closure for him.
Yeah. And that's also McCarthy, because McCarthy wants, if you read his books especially, he kind of struggles with this. He has this nihilistic streak. And I think in No Country, what you're seeing there is he knows that you as the audience wants to see justice.
Or closure.
Right? Closure. You want to see Javier Bardem. You're going to see him get killed. Like, okay, the world is right. Everything was fixed. And he's kind of telling you, but it doesn't work that way. You want it to. You wanted him to die, but he doesn't. He gets away. He just walks away. Because, life works like that sometimes. We want to believe everybody, the bad guys pay, but sometimes they just walk away from things.
And that's where I'm conflicted with stories like that. Even, the ending of Sopranos, there wasn't closure. So you can assume all these different things, but you never knew what the outcome. And you're like, all right, so now I have to wrestle with this, wondering what happened to this character.
Right. And see, I divide those into two different genres where I'd say, okay, is this writer, like in the case of McCarthy, I understand he's making sort of a philosophical point. So I'm like, okay, I'll afford you the luxury of not giving closure. Whereas I think The Sopranos, I tend to think the ending of that was they couldn't commit to an ending. They're like, oh, we don't want to make the audience mad. We don't want to kill them off on screen. So they just didn't, they was non-committal. It felt more non-committal to me as opposed to, okay, there's a purpose for this non-closure, right? Because he gets away because that's the way the world works, and he's trying to tell you that, whereas the other one felt more like a cop-out, if that makes sense.
John, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at J Slaughter Esquire. I just post stupid thoughts on there, and then my Substack is TexasJohnSlaughter at Substack.com, that's where I post most of my my articles. They're mostly my musings and political thoughts, and then of course the link to my novel is both on my Substack and it's a pinned tweet on my Twitter if anybody wants to check that out.
I would encourage everybody that listens to this, go get John's book. It's fantastic. It's I would describe it's a period piece, and it's gritty, and I mean it's a character that you have empathy for, but I don't know. Do you have sympathy for him?
Yeah, I think he's sort of a sympathetic character. Well, no, he's a character you root for because I think you want him to do the right thing. He's a character that you want to root for.
And the fact that he struggles with it, and I think that's what's so compelling about the story. I mean, you did a great job with it, John, and I'm excited for you. And thank you for doing this, and can't wait to have more conversations with you.
Oh yeah, man. No, thanks for having me and giving me the opportunity. And yeah, I'd love to come on and talk film, talk whatever. It doesn't matter. Let me know.
Mic drop.